welcome to this SheClicks webinar about macro photography. I'm Angela Nicholson and I'm the founder of SheClicks. Before we get started, I have a word from our sponsor, Affinity. If you could create your own photo editing software, it would look like this. Whether it's quick corrections, delicate retouching, or immersing yourself in complex fine art with hundreds of layers, Affinity Photo has you covered on Mac, PC and iPad with no subscription. Go to affinity.serif/photo to start your journey. So thank you very much to Affinity Photo for sponsoring this webinar. Now, today's webinar is presented by Tracy Calder, who is a good friend of mine, and she is the co-founder of Close-Up Photographer of the Year. Hi, Tracy, how are you?
Hi, Ange, nice to see you. Hi, everybody.
It's good to see you. It looks like you're in a cellar, but you're in your attic, are you?
It's the opposite. I'm in my loft stroke office. It's very glamorous. I could have put Hawaiian background or something, but I thought, let's keep it real.
Yes, I think we should. So when did Close-Up Photographer of the Year start? Because it seems to have grown really quickly.
Yeah, it started in 2018. We'd had the idea, my husband and I, for quite a few years before that. But yeah, we started in 2018 and the first year, I think we had about sort of 3,000 entrants. This previous year was sort of 6,500. So we're very much excited to see what a year 3 will bring. And obviously with everybody in lockdown, there's been a lot of macro and close-up photography going on. So that's been quite exciting from our perspective to see all the brilliant pictures people have been producing. So.
Yes, and when is the deadline for submission?
Well, it's going to be May this year. We haven't launched the third one yet. The third one's going to be launched in February due to obvious situations and homeschooling. I think it's been delayed a few weeks. But we will be launching in February. And if anyone wants to know the exact date, if they sign up to our newsletter on the competition website, kipotti.com, then they'll be the first to know when it goes live. So.
Oh, good. Right. So that is perfectly timed then, this webinar, because people can sort of start thinking about macro photography and then get ready to send in their work come February.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm very excited to see what everyone's going to produce.
Okay. Well, Tracy, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Angela. Thanks for having me on today. I'm really excited to be talking to everybody. So that's really looking forward to it. So first of all, I hope everyone's keeping safe and well, and thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover some of the key areas that people struggle with close-up and macro photography. I'm not going to talk so much about micro because that's quite a separate field, and a specialist area. So really, we're going to talk about close-up and macro photography mainly. So the first thing to say is that the competition is now coming into its third year, and it's supported by Affinity Photo, much like this webinar. And the main areas that we're going to talk about tonight that I think that people struggle with, having looked at the work and discussed with people, are finding inspiration, equipment and technique, background, composition, reducing camera and subject movement, which is a biggie for a lot of close-up photographers, especially plant photographers, depth of field, maximising it mainly, and lighting. So those are going to be our kind of main sort of areas of discussion tonight. So really the first thing I wanted to talk about was finding inspiration, because a lot of people in lockdown have been in a way rediscovering close-up photography, because obviously we've been stuck indoors a lot. People have been going to their kitchens and around the house and finding objects and trying to look at them in a new way, in a new light, and I think that's been a really exciting time for furthering the field of macro and close-up photography. So when I do anything like this, I usually talk about one of my favourite quotes by Bowman Newell, and he said, "We are not interested in the unusual, but in the usual seen unusually." And I just think that's absolutely perfect. It's a wonderful way of describing close-up and macro photography for me. So really, as we probably all learnt during this time, you don't need to travel miles. We don't have to go overseas. We can find amazing subjects in the very rooms that we're in right now, in fact. And one of our entrants this year took an amazing photograph of a spider that he'd actually taken in his bath, that he'd been keeping an eye on for a few days. So really, the more you look, the more you will see, whether around your house or in your garden or very close by. So we don't need to worry about going further afield, which is really good news right now, to be honest. But what we do need to do is kind of establish a sort of, I guess people call it a childlike curiosity or a beginner's mind. So it's about looking at subjects in a way that we might not have seen them before. So for instance, you'll often get a child, and a child will pick up something and think, okay, I'm going to make this box into a car, I'm going to make it into a TV screen. But we would just see it as a box, and we label things and we say, that's a box. What can I do with that? I'm just putting something in it. When we become adults, we look at things in a different way. So really, we need to start kind of looking, when we're thinking about close-up, looking at things in a more unusual way. So I guess it's just about being curious, really. And I think one of the entrants, Elizabeth Calder, said this year, take simple objects and focus on lighting them in dramatic ways. And she really does show how to do that quite brilliantly in her work that she does with folds of paper sort of suspended from the ceiling with bulldog clips. And it's something that we could all do if we could just think about it in a way that might, you know, turn something ordinary into something quite unusual. So one of the pictures I wanted to show, in fact, was from the first year of the competition. It was by Jeff Defoe. And I think what he did brilliantly is he took an amazing abstract photograph of some algal growth on the side of a plant pot. And it was taken in his garden. And it's something that, if we use this kind of childlike curiosity, you know, beginner's mind, I think we could all do. So I'm going to put that photograph up now. So just bear with me while I share my screen. There we go. So hopefully you can all see that there. So that was a photograph that Jeff took for the first year of the competition. I'm just going to read you the caption that he wrote for it because I find it quite interesting. And he says, I'm always looking for interesting close-up patterns and often use the small Ricoh GR camera to capture them. I like to shoot with it handheld and prefer a square aspect ratio. The image was taken, oh no, it wasn't his garden, it was East Ruston Old Vicarage Gardens. The plant pot was sitting in a damp, shady area behind the potting shed, which had encouraged the algal growth. So I love the idea that he kind of like was skulking around behind the potting shed, and it looks very painterly, which, and it, to me, there's no way that I would know that was a plant pot. So I think he's done a brilliant job of you know, adopting that childlike curiosity that we were just talking about. So let me unshare this. There we go. So the next thing I want to talk about is just, when you're looking for inspiration, it's really helpful to look at the work of others. And I spoke to a photographer a while ago, and it was really interesting. And she said, the best thing you can do when you're looking for inspiration is not look at other photographers' work. And I think she's got a point, actually. I think we could all do with spending a day, 2 days, you know, every couple of weeks, just looking outside of our field and looking at maybe architecture, we look at poetry, maybe we look at, you know, listen to some music, and that can give us other ideas that will then feed back into our work. And I think that really helps you come up with that whole beginner's mind sort of ethos. So a lot of close-up photography is about experimenting. And I don't think sometimes you know what an object's going to look like in a macro close-up setting until you have a go. So even if you think you've found the most boring object on earth, I've seen someone photograph a cheese grater, for instance, that looked amazing. Once you apply a close-up technique to it, it can just, you know, it can blow your mind. It can be absolutely incredible. So don't overlook anything, even if it's a soap dish, give it a go. And in fact, if you make mistakes as well, if you're experimenting, you think, oh, that didn't work out, I think it's really good to remember that the mistakes we make can be stepping stones to something greater later on. As long as we learn from them, they can be really useful. So macro photography involves a lot of experiments and a lot of mistakes. So yeah, so really, I think what you have to do is experiment, keep asking questions. And one entrant, I can't remember who it was actually, but this year she said, you've got to keep asking yourself, what would happen if I do this? What would happen if I do that? Don't leave any stone unturned, quite literally. Just keep going, keep experimenting. So yeah, so one thing that I want to talk about as well was plant photography, because I expect quite a few of you, like me, are really into your sort of plant portraits and things like that. And so I've seen some incredible pictures of plants when they're wilting, when they're dying, when they're fading, absolutely beautiful. So a lot of the time close-up photographers will say, you've got to get a perfect specimen, you know, you've got to make sure that there's no tears or blemishes. And that's true. But if what you're looking for is something different, faded and wilted flowers can turn into beautiful twisted shapes and things like that when they're sort of dying and fading. So don't ignore that as an option. So yeah, so the other thing is just to follow your instinct, because another entrant said that if something catches your eye, whether it be a colour, a texture, a shape, and it's caught your eye, stop, look at it, think about it. Why did it catch my eye? And come back to it. If you haven't got time now, think, okay, that colour attracted me, I'll come back tomorrow, I'll see what I can do with that. So trust your gut instinct with close up. The other section that I want to talk about within this kind of area is the power of research. Now, a lot of the people that entered this year's competition are wildlife photographers, and a lot of them are zoologists or conservationists. And I think what's interesting is the level of research they go to and just how incredibly knowledgeable they are about their subject matter, and that it shows in the pictures. And I think to take a portrait of a fly, or to take a portrait of a bug or any other creature, you can take the most amazing portrait and everyone will say, wow, that's incredible. But lifting it and elevating it and showing an element of behavior or something unusual, even if it's a plant and the way it behaves, I really think can take it on to the next level. So the power of research, I guess the idea is that you should plan in a way what you're going to take. Say you're going out and you think, today I'm going to go out and photograph springtails. Now, springtails are really popular in the macro area at the moment. They're these little almost like flea-like bugs. Say you decided you were going to set out, you were going to go out and you were going to do that. You might find out, where do these creatures, where do they stay overnight? What conditions are perfect conditions for them to go and feed, etc., etc. So it's important to plan, but also it's important to keep an element of flexibility as well, because you don't want to go out and think to yourself, I've got to get this shot today. And all the while, there's 100 other opportunities around you that you're missing because you've become so focused on what it is you're trying to do. So plan, but remain flexible within that. And in fact, one entrant said, the best shots aren't always where the action is. And I think that's really interesting, because this particular person, I think, had gone out to photograph some buffalo or some sort of animal, and then turned around and noticed there was this quieter scene behind him that was a much better photograph in the end. So you've still got to remain aware of what's going on around you. Don't become so blinkered that you're just going to, I've come for this shot, that's all I'm getting. So there's also this whole idea that you should pre-visualize a shot. And now we all know about sort of Ansel Adams and his idea that it begins with the negative, but in his mind at that point he was already thinking how he was going to process it, how he was going to print it 2 steps down the line. And there's some photographers that agree with that side of things, and there's another whole band of photographers that I found in our entrance that really think that it should be more sporadic, and you go out and you just photograph what you find and you trust your instinct. So there's one photograph that I wanted to show you, which I thought was really beautiful. And this is one from Mark Cooper from this year. And I think this was one I was going to show you about pre-visualizing. So let me get that up. I'll just share my screen on that. Bear with me. There we go. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, so that's Mark Cooper's, and I'm going to read you the caption that he put with this one. He said, "This image was taken on a photographically challenging morning. My original intention was to photograph a crisp and frosty landscape and investigate plenty of frozen puddles along the way. But shortly after arriving and walking out across the open northern commons, it clouded over and started to drizzle. The landscape quickly took on a dull grey colour, and any chance of frozen puddles quickly began to melt away. I stopped for a quick break under a large oak tree and noticed a couple of frozen puddles nearby. One was cracked and chaotic, but this one had a very calm and almost glowing line running through it. As I looked at the patterns in this puddle, I felt my mind wander back to watching the northern lights with a flask of hot chocolate in Iceland." And I think that's brilliant, because Mark had gone out to photograph something completely different, and yet he turned around and he'd seen that. And I think that's what we're talking about here. It's that idea of keeping a looseness about it and not becoming too blinkered. But it's a lovely picture, isn't it? And it's very, I don't know, it's very space-like, that one. And if anyone wants to know any of the technical detail on these pictures, then just go on our website, and they're all on there under the Willers galleries and the shortlisted galleries. So also there was another of our entrants, Hal Gage, who talked about pre-visualizing. And he says he always visualizes the final image before he trips the shutter. So he will constantly be thinking, how am I going to post-process this? Because that's a part of the process that he really enjoys. But some people, like myself, I don't like doing too much post-processing, so I probably wouldn't pre-visualize something in the same way as that. But if I'm choosing flowers, or I'm in a florist or whatever, I will think about how I'm going to arrange the picture when I get home, and what colours I've already got at home, and that sort of thing. So yeah, so have a plan, a rough plan beforehand, but be aware things can change. So the next point I wanted to make was about staying local. Now this is quite handy now, obviously, because I would imagine everybody watching this right now is pretty much staying local. So yeah, so there's a real benefit in kind of exploring your local patch, keep returning to the same place, and really go the distance there, really exhaust somewhere until you really think there's no more pictures to be had. And I can assure you there are still more pictures to be had, especially with close up, because the more you look, the more you see. So yeah, Greg Whitten in the first year, he said something which I thought was wonderful. He said, one can lose oneself for hours in an area no larger than a squash court. And it's so true. I really think you could spend 5-6 hours on a square meter and still not exhaust the possibilities. So really, you know, keep it local, return to the same place. They're always good things to do. And one thing, there was one entrant this year which I found was quite interesting, was Ripon Biswas, and he said he stood for hours knee deep in a muddy swamp to get an image of a paper wasp. Now that's commitment. And he said, many poisonous insects bit me on the leg and I had to take medication for this afterwards, but the most difficult part was getting the flying insect in focus. And I thought, now that is a true photographer. I'm being eaten alive, but I'm going to get this picture. So yeah, and one of the things about returning often as well is a lot of entrants say that when you're shooting close up, the small area that you're photographing changes dramatically depending on time of day, the season, the weather conditions. So really going back to the same patch, whether it may be the same local reserve you go to, whether it's the same beach and you're photographing the rocks, whatever it may be, it's really worth returning in different seasons, different times of day, and just noting, and maybe taking a sketchbook or maybe a notebook and writing down writing down what you discover and when you should go back to remind yourself. So yeah, so Tina Claffey, who I guess you could say her specialization is Irish bogs. And she is brilliant at it, absolutely fantastic. And she really recommends going back to the same areas. She says, return to the same area at different times of day and season to observe the changes in flora, fauna, and light. And I think it's so true for rocks or for tide areas. The colours change dramatically. Everything changes half an hour later. So, you know, do keep going back to the same thing, even if you think you've exhausted every possibility. So I wanted to show you a picture now, which was one of my favourites from the first year of the competition. And this is by Jo Angel. And Jo, she took the most beautiful picture of a zebra spider, which I'm about to show you. So I'm warning you, if you don't like spiders, it's coming up. So Jo really does show the benefits of choosing a patch that's close to home. This was taken in her garden, somewhere you can just pop out to, and your kids might be having dinner or whatever it is, and you go, hang on a minute, I can get out there, so that you will go and you'll keep at it, because with close up, the more practice, the more rewards you'll get. So let me just share this. There we go. Hopefully you can see that there. So I'm going to read you Jo's caption, because I think it really does sum up the point that I'm making here. She says, it was a warm day and I'd noticed how active the bees were around the bug house in my back garden. I had some spare time on my hands, so I positioned a chair in line with the house and sat and watched the bees for a while. Some of them were in the bamboo sticks and I had several little faces staring right back at me. I took some pictures, but as I watched, I noticed a zebra spider moving in and out of the different areas of the bug house. Zebra spiders are quite small, so they're literally about 7 millimeters, which is tiny. So getting them in focus can be quite tricky. When they move, they can be too quick to follow with the cameras, so I find waiting until they pause to be the best option. However, more often than not, they return, or I'm at the wrong angle. This is where the 3 Ps come in: patience, persistence, and practice. I watched as the zebra spider made its way down the bamboo stick and finally paused in a wonderful position, just looking out of the hole. And I think those 3 words are absolutely key to close-up and macro photography: patience, persistence, and practice. Okay, so that's Joe. Now, the other thing I wanted to say was some entrants suggest that, you know, if you're photographing it, you want to photograph an insect like a butterfly. We'll come on to that in a minute, but it's a really good idea to find your area first, find your flower first. And that's really what Jo had done when she was watching the bees. You find your flower first, and then you wait for the action to come to it. Because with macro, if you suddenly start chasing around after a bee or a butterfly or whatever it might be, you'll never catch it. You'll never catch it, especially if you're shooting in the middle of the day when an insect has warmed up, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, sometimes it's best to find your position and just sit and wait. It's a bit like street photography, I guess, that you find the nice backdrop and then you sit and you wait. And if you've done your research, you'll know which flowers certain insects will come to, and you'll be in a good place to you know, likely to see something. Yeah, so the other thing is not to pack up too soon, because there's a great comment that this year that Jeff Hyde made, which I think sums it up perfectly. And he just said, and it is about, obviously, some of the best pictures come at the end of a shoot. And he said, I find it's very common to find my best bugs at the very end of a session, when I'm closer to the Zen state in which I do my best shooting, which is a bit like that beginner's mind thing again. I've even tried trying to fool my mind by pretending to pack up my gear well before I'm actually planning to finish. Unfortunately, this doesn't work. I do quite like the idea of him trying to trick himself to, you know, to pack up, but but apparently it doesn't work, so don't try it. So yeah, so there's a lot to be said for being patient and going the distance. You know, when you've had enough and you're bored and you think, do you know what, I'm tired, I'm cold, whatever, just stay a few more minutes, and you might be surprised, because once you're in that state of mind for close up, once you start seeing pictures, you see them everywhere. So I think, yeah, you just stay that little bit longer. And one thing that a lot of flower photographers do, and I think there's probably some members of the group probably do this, and I wish I had the green fingers to do it myself, but they often say, if you take the long view, if you want to photograph a perfect flower specimen, sometimes you've got to grow it yourself. And I know you might think, well, hang on a minute, I want to take a picture, I've got to plan a year and a half in advance to get that picture. But sometimes taking the long view really does work. It really does. And also, if it's in your garden, you've got a whole batch of fresh subject matter out there to pick and choose when you like. So take the long view, give it a go, grow it yourself if you have, you know, space for it. So yeah, so in fact, I think Sophia Spurgeon was talking about that in the first year of the competition, and she was saying that her interest in photography has developed the recent 5 years or so into a passion. And it determines, I think she said, oh yeah, where I visit, what I look at, and even what I grow in my garden. So, you know, it's a lesson to us all. We could all have amazing photogenic subjects in our garden if we knew how to do it. And then Tina as well, I was talking about earlier on with her Irish bogs. She also advocates creating a small wildlife pond if you have space in your garden, because obviously ponds attract a lot of damselflies and other wildlife. And if you build a pond with slabs or grass along part of the edge, but with the one area that doesn't have any sort of marginal plants, it will allow you to get down to the water level when you're photographing. So that's quite a good tip for anybody who's got the space to do something like that. So the next thing is really about how quickly your skills would progress with close up if you set yourself a project, or perhaps you might decide to specialize in a certain area. Now in the competition we get a lot of people that, you know, their main specialization is, it's almost like a niche within a niche within a niche. It'll be Kim Cox, for instance, her specialization is soap bubbles, and if any of you've seen Kim's work, it's absolutely incredible. But she obviously went from a wider thing, and then she's interested in science, so she went zoom, 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 this is what I'm going to do, and she owns that field. So yeah, so specialization, or you set yourself a project. For instance, when we talk about specializations, there's Tina and the Irish bogs, and then Stephen David Johnson, who entered this year, he specializes in these things called vernal pools, which other people probably know more about than me, but they're little sort of seasonal pools that are very shallow, and yeah, that's his area. He gets all sorts of amazing pictures of sort of newts and things like that in the pools, and again, his knowledge shows in his photography, and he's very eco-aware, and he just says things like, you know, make sure that if you're wearing welly boots and if you have to step into the pool, don't step into another pool, because you could be sharing bacteria between the pools that could cause damage. So again, research, and when you really know your subject and you really specialize, you can create some incredible pictures and share your knowledge, which is what photography is often about as well. Yeah, and one person who I really would like to mention this year, I don't know whether you managed to see the pictures, they're all on our website if you do want to see them, is Barry Webb. And Barry Webb has taken some of the most amazing pictures I've seen of slime molds. And if you don't think slime molds are exciting, I beg to differ, because we're going to look at one of those in a minute, and it is really fantastic. Yeah, so I would say the next thing would be look high and look low, because with close up, as I've said before, anything around you can become a fascinating subject. So don't forget, get down on your knees, and close up often involves getting dirty. So I advise a pair of waterproof trousers, a gardening kneeling mat, all that kind of stuff is really helpful. So don't forget to take all that up with you. Yeah, so look high, look low, look all around. And one of the benefits of close-up, again, is that because your subject is so small, you can often look at it from almost every single angle. And, you know, there's not often that we can do that. We can often look up under something if it's a flower, we can look down on it. So explore that. We're lucky that we can do that. So if you can, do the whole circuit, down, up, around. So yeah, so one of the pictures, the next picture I want to show actually was by an example of that, and that's Mel Colley, who some of you may know, and she does some incredible, beautiful photography. Her photographs of man-made stuff are incredible. Her beach photography is amazing, and she's just started a Facebook group, which some of you might be interested in, which is to do with photography and well-being, which obviously I think is very, you know, well, it's a subject that we're all interested in right now, I think. So do take a look at that. But let me just find this picture of Mel's. So I'll just share my screen. Let's get a picture of those. There we go, so hopefully you can see that. Okay, so that's one of Mel Colley's, and this is from Cornwall. And I'm just going to read a little bit. Now, I don't know if this one applies to this picture, but let me have a quick read. During lockdown. Possibly, I'll read it. Lockdown, I really thought I am to be living by the sea. Growing up near the coast influenced me as a child, the open space being so important for my brain and my well-being, which is what we were just talking about. Having all of this on my doorstep has been a lifesaver. Scrambling down the well-trodden coast path, there are treasures to be found along the shoreline. For a few hours, I can get totally lost amongst the rocks, wandering through the newly fallen boulders to show their hidden treasures for the first time to human eyes. What a treat. And Mel does point out in her caption that her partner's a mountain guide, so he shows her what to look out for, so she does do it in a completely safe way. So yeah, so Mel shoots a lot on an iPhone as well, so we're going to look at technology in a minute, so it could be worth bearing that in mind. A lot of those pictures are on iPhones. Okay, there we go. Right. So yeah, set yourself a project, specialise, look high, look low. Again, we talked a minute ago about finding the best specimen without tears or blemishes, and especially mushrooms as well. If you find a mushroom and it's got lots of bites out of it from a deer or something like that, then it never looks that great. If you've seen one, keep looking, because there will be another one, and believe me, eventually you will find your perfect specimen. The next thing I wanted to look at just briefly was about weather. Oh, Melanie Colley is the name. So yeah, so when the wind speed rises above sort of 10 miles per hour, a lot of plant photographers just say, don't bother. Because when you're shooting close up, if a flower's being pushed about by the wind, that will be, you know, in a close up picture, it will literally look like it's being whipped from one side of the frame to the other. And there are things you can do to prevent that, and we'll talk about that using sort of supports and clips and things like that. But I guess what you're aiming for is a wind speed of sort of 5 miles per hour or less if you're going out and you're going to take some flower photography. But having said that, if the wind is up a bit and you haven't got a support or a windbreak or anything like that, then I would say just try and choose some plants that have a thick stem. So tulips, for instance, have quite a thick stem. Try not to pick anything too delicate, and you should be okay. But do have a look at the weather forecast if you're going out to do that. But don't be put off by what people would class as bad weather, because I know, you know, sometimes you'll be out taking a photo. I mean, we know this as photographers. We all know that overcast conditions can be fantastic for photography. They lower contrast, they help show detail, colour. But sometimes you'll be out and about and someone will say, oh, you want to wait for the sun to come out? Well, no, as we know, we don't. And in close-up, often we really don't. So overcast conditions can be fantastic for flower photography, close-up flower photography. And working at the edge of the seasons as well could be quite a good idea. So don't be frightened of bad weather. Get out there. As long as you're happy that your gear's protected and you're protected, then you know you can get some incredible photographs in ice, snow, rain, of close-up pictures. And then obviously when we're talking about weather, if you're out on the coast, you're going to need to check the tide times and things like that. Obviously there's a safety reason for that, but also because when the tide retreats, it can often leave some incredible details on the rocks and in sand patterns and things like that. So again, it's almost kind of like going out at those sort of extremes, extreme weather, extreme when the tide is changing, when the seasons are changing. They can be really, really good times to go out with your camera. Photographing on a falling tide. Tom Lowe suggested that last year, actually. And someone who does really know her stuff when it comes to sort of coastal photography is Nora Kirkback. And I'm going to show you one of Nora's sand pictures, which was entered in year 1 of the competition. So let me just get that up. There we go. Which I think is absolutely beautiful and really subtle as well. That's what I love about it. It's just the play of light, isn't it? And those beautiful diagonals, because in photography, you know, as we know, compositionally, diagonals can often work really nicely. So this is one of Nora's, and I think, oh yeah, I've got Nora's caption here. And Nora makes me laugh because one of her comments last year, I think one of her tips was put your sand goggles on. So really, she's talking about, you know, going out and literally you're going out and today you're just looking at the sand patterns and you're, you know, focusing on that. And I love the idea of her going out, I had this vision of her with sort of sand goggles on. But the caption for this one is, when it comes to photography, I have 2 main interests, sand patterns and flies. To indulge the first, I visit beaches on the island of Vigra, now apologies for that pronunciation, on the west coast of Norway where I live. This photograph was taken in January some years ago. A picture like this depends on the light, how low the sun is, the angle you choose, the reflections from the sky, and so on. I love the light during winter, but we only get a few hours of daylight during the darkest period of the year, and the tide has to correspond with the lightest hours. It's usually cold, windy, and wet. So I use plastic bags on my knees, and I bought a pair of Wellington boots that are 3 sizes too big so I can put extra socks on in an effort to keep the cold out. Let me just stop share. And that's what, one of the things I love about close-up photography is you can often find us wearing the most ridiculous gear and lying on the ground. And in fact, when I've taught at West Dean College before, one of my students was they called the security over because they thought she'd had a heart attack because she was lying in the riverbed taking a photograph and she was so still and so quiet. And I thought, that's it, that's what we want. That's what we want, close-up photographers lying on the ground getting dirty, not causing alarm, but getting dirty and really getting stuck in. So that was about you know, getting your, well, checking the tides and you know, going at the extremes of weather conditions and tidal ranges. So yes, you want to get yourself ready, you get your gear ready. If you want to wear wellies that are 3 sizes too big, go for it. But just make sure you're comfortable, because when we go out for close-up and we're lying on the ground, we're photographing a mushroom or something like that, when you get cold and you get wet, you want to go home. And it's quite easy with close-up to get in that position. So I always take water, I always wear waterproof trousers, and I'll always take a recycling bag or something to lie on. So make sure you're prepared, get your gear ready the night before, obviously. But one thing that I thought was quite amusing was one of the guys who takes some incredible sort of snowflake pictures. If you haven't seen them, do have a look. It's Don Komarechka, and he's got a brilliant YouTube channel showing you how he does it. It's very complicated for me. But he says, don't be afraid to suffer slightly for your art. these images require an uncomfortable amount of cold air. So I thought, okay, you know, fair enough, he's telling us sometimes it is fantastic, his work is fantastic, so do have a look at it. And also the other thing I thought was, this was Matea who said this. You might have seen, he took a beautiful frog picture that was in the press quite a lot from the competition this year, and he said, do not be afraid of the ridiculousness of being seen crouching in a very shallow river wearing full scuba diving outfit. Brilliant, why not? If it works for him, why not? So the next thing I wanted to talk about really was the idea of showing an element of behaviour in your close-up pictures or telling a story. And I did an Instagram course a few months ago, and the lady who ran it, Sarah Tasker, she was saying she's all about sharing moments and not things. And I think that's a really important part, really, is the idea that, you know, you should, when you're photographing something, you want to tell a story, you want to explain not just what you saw, but how you felt when you took that picture. So it's really, with close-up, we have so many things to worry about. We've got the whole technical side, we've got depth of field, we've got the equipment to worry about. And sometimes we forget that we need to be able to show people what emotionally drew us to that scene and how can we do that. So you can take the most wonderful portrait shot, but an element of behaviour, again, will elevate it. So look for stories. So one of the entries this year, Kai, he said he wrote a piece in his caption about how the two mushrooms that he was photographing, one of them looked like an older brother guiding and nurturing the kind of smaller mushroom, the little brother. And there was also lots of talk with plant photographers about mothers protecting their young and things like that. And I love all that, because I think the storytelling element in close-up photography is just as important, if not more so, than in other genres. So don't forget that aspect. So keep your eyes open for interesting stories, and then you need to use your technique to draw out those stories, which we can do if we research behaviour and do our planning. So I promised you one of those pictures of the slime moulds, and it sounds gross, but trust me, they are amazing. And if you have a chance to look at Barry's work in his website, they are, I'm sure you'll be as blown away as I was by them. So let's have a look. There we go. So how cool is that? It's great, isn't it? So this one he called Slime Moulds on Parade. And these are tiny, I mean, super, super tiny. So this image, in fact, is a stack of 34 focus bracketed pictures. And we're going to talk a little bit about focus stacking later on. So he took this in February 2020, so it's quite a recent one, in a mixed woodland in Buckinghamshire, UK. It shows a line of 2.5mm high fungi, fruiting bodies of the slime mould, which I'm not going to try and pronounce, growing on a decaying beech trunk. And one of the tips he had was he always takes a loop out with him. So he takes a 10 times loop out, and it has a built-in LED in it, and that helps him examine the slime moulds and work out, the composition that he wants to make with his camera. So he liked the group because he thought it showed different stages in their development, but also when he looked through the magnifier, he noticed that the fruiting bodies resembled people standing in a line, and he thought the holes in the stems looked like little legs. And I just think that's fantastic. That was one of my favourite pictures in this year's competition. So let me unshare that. There we go. So I guess study your subject, use natural history guides. There's a guide, and let me just check the name of it. iNaturalist, which quite a few people recommended. I as in the letter I, naturalist, which is supposed to be very good. But I haven't used it myself, but a number of entrants recommended that. And also some of the people that really know their stuff were saying things like, if you're photographing an insect, if it's feeding, if it's mating, it's not going to be that interested in you. So if you can find those times and those incidences, it's going to give you a much better chance of getting a photograph. So look out for sort of instances and plan ahead to try and work out when these things might happen, because it will give you a much better chance. There's a lady, Ellen Woods, who takes some beautiful, very wide angle flower photography and various other things. And she says, but she often uses ID guides, but she's an expert in her field anyway. But she says, I'm constantly adding to my own knowledge base, taking note of what plants I see, where and when I see them, what condition they're in, i.e. peak flower, etc., and how light might move throughout the site during the day. So I think what's quite interesting is that you get the butterfly photographers and the flower photographers, and they might be thinking, okay, this flower's going to bloom in June, but they'll be spotting the shoots in the winter. They'll be spotting caterpillars, and they'll be spotting, even if it's nibbled leaves or caterpillar poo, they'll be spotting that months ahead of when they want to take their photograph. So take your notebook out, look for signs of what might be coming further down the line. Especially, as I say, we're in this situation where we're all kind of stuck indoors quite a lot, or in our local areas. It can be worth just observing the seasons, and I think that's good for your mental well-being anyway, isn't it? So that's always good. So prepare everything before, the night before or whatever. And one thing, that's what I was going to show you actually. Oh yeah, a little bit of a thing about butterflies and dragonflies. Now, a huge percentage of our entrants photograph butterflies, and we equally, I'd say, dragonflies actually. And most of us will know that butterflies, if you try and shoot them in the middle of the day, you don't really stand the chance. They've warmed up, they're very flighty, they fly quite high. Sometimes some of them almost go up to the treetops. And the minute you cast a shadow on them, they're off. So the best thing to do is to go the night before and see where they're going to go to sleep. And then one guy, Sebastian, whose picture I'm going to show you, he went out, which I thought was really amusing. He found the dragonfly he wanted to photograph, and he put a flag next to it. And then the next morning he came back to photograph it so that he could find it easily again, which I thought was quite cool. So I'm going to show you Sebastian's picture. Okay. Okay. There we go. Hopefully you can see that now. So he went out the night before and just put a flag down. So he said, this picture was taken in the morning in May during the sunrise. The field it was taken in is close to my house in the south of France. I spotted this dragonfly the evening before, put a flag next to it in order to be able to find it again. I used the trees in the background to create this frame that makes this image look like a 16 by 9 movie. I love the way the dragonfly wings look when they're taken in pictures like that, both delicate and really complex at the same time. Okay, so that's Sebastian. So also, if you photograph butterflies and dragonflies in the morning, you stand quite a good chance of getting some bouquet as well. Now, there's a lot of people like Perdita Petzel or Henrique, who you might have come across, who are masters of this. So I would take a look at their work first and read what they say about it. But really, if you want to get good bouquet, you might want some dew on the grass. You'll have a wide aperture. You'll get down really low. There are various techniques to it that they will know. If you read up on their websites, they'll be able to tell you in a lot more depth how they achieve those sort of effects. But that's another reason for getting up early in the morning. So butterflies can need a bit of pre-planning. Also, sometimes if you want to photograph something unusual, hire a guide to help you, because a guide will know a lot more about a subject, whether it be a plant or whether it be an animal, especially if you're after something like, one of the guys who won the first year, Manuel, he was really, he's an expert, but he still hired a guide to come and help him track this snake. So don't be frightened to ask people and ask around and see if you can get someone from a wildlife trust or something to come and show you something. It really is worth using their knowledge and maybe offering to volunteer in return, help in some way. So the next thing is equipment and technique. Now, I think a lot of people are put off close-up and macro photography because they think they need to spend a lot of money. And I would say to that, you can spend as much as you want. Because really, when I first started out in shooting close up, to begin with, let's talk about the difference, because people use the terms close up and macro interchangeably, but in reality, scientifically speaking, or mathematically speaking, however you want to say it, 1-to-1 life size is macro. Anything less than that is close up. But I know that, and then I ignore that because it really, I'm not interested, I'm not worried about that at all. All I'm interested in is, can I get as close as I want to my subject and get it sharp? That's all you really need to worry about. And if you can do that, and you can do that without a macro lens, and you can do it with extension tubes, you could do it with the screw-on filters, the close-up filters. Nissi just bought a really good close-up filter in the optical quality on it is really fantastic. So don't feel you have to go out and spend £1,000 on a macro lens, because a lot of the pictures that were entered this year were taken on mobile phones with little ollie clips and things like that, or they were taken with point and shoot cameras. So I have a macro lens. I have a Sigma 105mm macro lens and I love it. But when I started out, I just had the screw-on close-up filters and I used to use 2 at once. And all the attachments, things like extension tubes, things like reversing your lens on the camera, all that sort of stuff, they all have downsides compared to a macro lens. You might lose light, you might lose the auto connection with the camera. So they all have a downside, but those downsides can usually be overcome if you really think, I'm not ready to splash out a big amount yet. So don't worry if you haven't got a macro lens, is what I'll say. You can do a lot with what you've got, so don't worry about that. And as Hal Gage said this year, remember, cameras don't make photographs, photographers make photographs. Focus on your expression, not on the equipment. And it's so, so true. So if you want to get closer and you don't have a macro lens, I'm not going to go into this in detail because really you can read up on all of these things and my technical knowledge in it will be way less than anyone you could go on YouTube to find out. But the options available to you, really, the close-up attachment lenses, which I just talked about. You've got bellows, you've got reversing rings, you could turn the lens round backwards on your camera. You've got all of these alternatives, and all they're really trying to do is reduce the minimum focusing distance. So really the distance between the subject and the sensor, the focal plane, basically. So that's all they're trying to do. So there are various ways of doing that, but like I say, they all have pluses and minuses. So if you're interested in getting to macro and you're thinking, well, I don't want to splash out, try one of those out first. They're a lot cheaper, or borrow a macro lens off somebody or a company, or buy secondhand. I mean, a lot of my macro gear has been secondhand from places like MPB. So you can get stuff for a very reasonable price, and Sigma and Tamron make amazing macro lenses. So there are cheaper options out there. So I'd also say quite a few pictures this year were taken with wide angle lenses as well. So don't think macro got to be taken with a macro lens. No, you can use a wide angle lens. You can use, and that will allow you to include a lot of the kind of environment around, or the context of your subject. Also, a lot of people were using, now this I'm really interested in, I expect there's people in the group that are really, really good at this stuff. People using vintage lenses for macro photography. I'm going to show you an example of that in a minute, actually. So you can use a vintage lens, you could use lens baby lenses, things like the Velvet 56 lens baby are really popular for flower photography, macro flower photography. And those probe lenses, which are almost like they're on a sort of bendy sort of snake arm that you can get into sort of leaves and into little cave, holes in the ground and stuff like that. So sometimes a modern macro lens is not your best option for macro, bizarrely. You have an experiment with some vintage lenses, see what you can do, and I will show you what can be done with this picture because this blew me away. Now, there we go, hopefully you can see that. Now, I thought there must have been lots of post-production and jiggery-pokery on this, but in fact there wasn't. This was actually taken by Jose, and I can't remember his name, Pasquero. I think. Do forgive me if you're listening, Jose. So yeah, he took this of a spider, obviously, and he took. Now, what did he do with this? He took it with a vintage lens. Oh, he didn't say which one it was. But basically, the vintage lens is what's created all of those kind of spectral highlights around the spider. And he took 2 photographs. One was of the spider, and the other one was of, I think it was of a flower nearby, and I think it was an in-camera multiple exposure. Hey, here we go. After shooting a first shot of the spider with my macro lens, I took a second shot of some flowers with a manual focus vintage lens, hiding the central area of the image that I wanted to preserve from the first shot. So he combined those two, and I hope you agree that I think that is pretty marvellous. So let's get rid of him for the time being. There we go. Yeah, so lens-wise, I would just say, you know, if you're photographing butterflies or dragonflies and things like that, then a short to long telephoto lens is pretty good. Anything that can keep you far enough away not to disturb it, but, you know, that you can still get a frame-filling shot. But don't worry too much about thinking, like I say, that you've got to spend a fortune, because not so. And also, close-up is brilliant for homemade accessories. There's so many people in the close-up world. In fact, there's a whole Facebook group called Homemade Flash Diffusers, I think. So you can, there's all sorts of things you can make out of tin foil. You can make lots of gadgets, lots of backdrops. You can do so much on the cheap in close-up, and a lot of people take great delight in sort of, you know, fashioning something. Oh yes, Pringles can. Yes, I see that. Yes, I've seen people use Pringles cans. The Pringles cans seem very useful. So yeah, so all sorts of bits and pieces you can use. The extra things I have, I always use tweezers to get rid of sort of, you know, petals that are in the way, or leaves and things like that. And I use nail scissors. I might trim a little bit of grass or something like that. Paintbrush to remove bits of pollen or dust. But if you are going to do that, just be really careful and really aware of what you're doing, because obviously a lot of plants are protected by the Wildlife and Countryside Act. So don't go uprooting anything, don't go picking anything that's protected. Just be a bit aware of that sort of thing. Yeah, so I guess it can be quite tempting with macro to become obsessed with getting maximum depth of field, but in fact, I think personally, I'm really fond of pictures that exploit a shallow depth of field in macro photography, especially plant photographs. So if you're really precise about where you focus and you really know where you want the eye to be drawn to first, then do not worry too much about the rest of it falling out of focus. It can be beautiful, it can be dreamy, it can add a soft sort of impressionistic feel. So don't worry too much. Sometimes there are benefits to staying wide open, so don't worry about that. I'll just show you a quick, actually no, I won't show you that one because we might not get to that. Okay, so tripod, some people say, I hate them, it slows me down, I don't want to use it, it really isn't for me. All I would say is please, please, please try. Some people can take amazing focus stat pictures handheld. Some people have got the steadiest hands out there. But the minute I picked up a tripod for close-up work and started using it, my photography improved like you would not believe. It really was, you know, 100 times better, because it just means that you don't have to worry about the steadiness issue and the blurring. You can concentrate on everything else that's going on, which is what we want to do as photographers. We don't want to be worrying about, am I holding the camera steady enough? So yeah, so I would say personally I use a Manfrotto 055 tripod, and I really would say if you're looking at buying a new tripod for close-up work, try to get one with a central column that can be positioned horizontally, because then you can shoot straight down on something, you know, and you can get really low to the ground. And the minute I got a tripod that I could do that with, again, it really opened up artistically what I was able to achieve. So do think about getting something with the, you know, central column. There's quite a few brands that do them now, but mine's a Manfrotto. Yeah, so if you do think I hate tripods, can't do it, I want a handhold, I guess just if your lens has got great image stabilization, great, go for it. But personally, yeah, and blur can be good sometimes if it's intentional, obviously. So just experiment a bit, play around. But I would say tripod or a beanbag. I love beanbags, especially for fungi and stuff like that. Now, one of the things that a lot of people did this year, which I thought was great, was they were playing around with multiple exposures, and they were combining multiple exposures with intentional camera movement at the same time. And that just blew me away, because to me, it's hard enough for me to get one of those right. But there was some really fantastic stuff going on this year with that sort of thing. So I guess close-up is about just exploring. If you're using ICM and you're using multiple exposures, you could probably be photographing, you could be photographing a tree, or you could be photographing a window, and you might be able to get something incredible out of it. Just the most mundane of objects, just by experimenting with those two techniques and combining them. So that's worth giving a go. Yeah, so there's a picture by, it's Catherine Baldock who took this one, and this is when she used camera, yes it was, she used intentional camera movement with multiple exposures, and I'm going to show you what you can do with that. That's one of her. Let me just get that shared. There we go. So that's one of hers, and I think this is of Autumn Beaches. I think that might be one that, if I remember rightly, it might be one that she took on from the car. Yeah. This image was taken in the New Forest on a dull day. So again, dull day, made the most of it. Returning to the car after a walk, spent some time photographing a splendid beech tree that caught her eye in the car park, and used multiple exposures to experiment with different textures, first taking shots of the bark in close up and then overlaying exposure, looking up into the branches so the leaves were superimposed in outline. This process took some time, and she had to move between exposures to get the different angles and experiment with different blend modes to get the image she was looking for. So again, multiple exposures, I don't think there's any hard and fast rule to them. I think experimenting is absolutely key with multiple exposures. So just get out there, give it a go. So there we go. Black and white, again, have a go at black and white. In the competition, we've probably seen about 5 pictures over the 2 years that have been black and white. So it's a good way of making your work stand out, let's put it that way. And it really is, I do think you can get some really, really stonking black and white close-up shots. So have a go at that. And I think it's quite challenging, but have a go at that, because Gillian Plummer took a great one of a cactus this year, and it really stood out. So that's one way of getting noticed. So yeah, so black and white. Obviously check the edges of your frame, don't want any bits of grass or bits like that sticking in. We don't want anything coming in at the edges and spoiling our beautifully composed picture. And now one thing that I loved this year and last year was that I would say, I don't know, 70% of the entrants talked about slowing down. And they said the one thing that will improve your close-up and macro photography is just slow down. Regardless of the technology you use, regardless of what you're photographing, slow down, think about what you're doing, just sit and just watch, don't even take a picture for 5 minutes, just sit and watch what's going on around you, let things develop around you, sit, enjoy it, and then pick your camera up. It's about slowing down. Even if you're photographing underwater, if you were to dive underwater, all the silt, everything's going to get disturbed. If you were to stay still for a minute, eventually everything will settle down around you and find its place again. So slow down, sit down, really take your time. And in fact, Mel Collier, who I spoke about earlier, she said something brilliant this year, and it's the mind that decides when to take the image. So spending time on understanding yourself is just as important as understanding apertures and shutter speeds. Awareness of your bias filters. Many of us see a tatty boat or a rusty gate or peeling paint on a neglected wall or door. There is always more to what we think we are seeing. Take your time, slow down your pace and your breathing, and see rather than look. And I think that is a brilliant, brilliant way of describing it. So yes, slow down. Yeah, so the importance of backgrounds. A background can make or break a close-up picture. It's really important to think about what's behind your subject. It might be that you should really take as much time thinking about the background as you do as the main subject. Really, you can use man-made backgrounds. For instance, a lot of photographers, when they're photographing butterflies, they might shoot it against an overcast sky to get a high key effect, or they might whiteboard behind it. So you can use man-made backgrounds. You might put your backpack. I think Perdita Petzel in the first year used her back of her camera backpack that was black behind one of the caterpillars she was photographing. Again, looked amazing. You can buy backdrops, obviously, for home use. You can buy the vinyl ones, or you can use bits around the house. And sometimes, if you're worried about sort of, getting the colours right, sometimes I use like a floristry wheel that you can get, like an artist colour wheel, and you can look and say, okay, that complements that contrasts with that. I'll get a backdrop that will work for me and give the ultimate contrast. Yeah, so composition. I think people with close-up photography, they sometimes composition goes out of the window. They think, okay, I've got so much to worry about here. I'm sure I don't need to worry about leading lines. I'm sure I don't need to worry about, you know, all the usual stuff that we worry about in landscape photography and the rule of thirds, but they all still apply to close-up work. You might not have a fence leading into the picture or a river, but you will have a line or the line of a petal or something like that. So really do remember that the rules still apply to close-up, you know, the compositional rules. So don't forget. Or you might alternatively decide you want to break all the rules and completely go against it, just like we do in you know, other genres. So, you know, either break the rules or stick to the rules, up to you. So I'll just show you this one. Now this is one where it breaks the rules. This is Stefan, where is he? Let me see, here we go. There, now, this one is one where, and I don't know whether he used a, did he use, now, yeah, I guess, I mean, this is breaking the rules, really. I mean, I guess you could look at this and it would be very tempting to go in very close on these butterflies, and they're kind of, even though they're at the top of the frame, they're kind of central, aren't they? So in a way, it feels a bit like he's breaking the rules. He's blown out the sky completely, so there's no detail in it, and everything about it feels like it shouldn't work, but it just works. The space in it has given it gravitas. The negative areas are really important, and they, you know, he's paying a lot of attention to make sure that reed goes all the way across and comes out the other side. It doesn't end anywhere. It's a lovely arc. So that's Stefan's. Okay, so yeah, so you can forget the rules. A lot of people, it can be about kind of trying to find a sense of order in the chaos. So you might look at a particularly interesting flower and you're looking for a way in, you're looking for a way to organize those planes of shapes and colors. So I guess that's when looking at paintings and looking at other things can be helpful, trying to find your way into a picture. So yeah, so finding order in chaos, that's again Nora with her sand pattern glasses. Consider negative space, which is the picture we just looked at. Negative space, as we know, is hugely important in a photograph. So give that as much importance as you do the area containing the subject. Now, how are we doing for time, Ange, actually? Can you put me a little message up?
We are, what time is it? It's just after 8 o'clock.
Oh, and when do we finish, just to be...
When you're finished.
I was hoping you'd say that. Sorry, everyone, I won't go on forever.
No, it's fine. Keep going. Everyone's loving it.
Excellent. So yeah, so consider the negative space and think about how those things balance with each other. That's really important. And now we're going to talk a little bit about reducing camera and subject movement, because that's a real bugbear for close-up and macro photographers. So we've talked about using a tripod, but there are other ways that we can keep our subject steady rather than just our camera. And now I use a thing that some of you might have already heard of it or use it, but it's called a Wimberley clamp, which sounds very, very odd. And all it is really is like an articulated arm with a little pincer on the end. And you can attach it to one end to your leg of your tripod, or you can attach it to the branch of a tree, and you can hold a stem or something quite like a steady. It also is brilliant acting as a third hand for holding a diffuser or reflector. I think Wex sell them actually. Yeah, so that's really good. And you can use, so you can use all sorts of things like floristry wire and things like that. So if you've got a plant that's moving around, say the wind speed is up above 5 miles an hour, you can get a little garden cane, prop it in, tie the stem with a little bit of floristry wire to the cane. Or you can use little windbreaks. You might have seen people get these sort of cubes that you can take outdoors and zip one side out and put it round, which is quite interesting. So tripod, that's that one. Oh, cable release, and I mean, obviously if you've got a DSLR, then locking the mirror up, really in close-up photography, it's advisable to do that because it will stop any internal vibration in the camera, which can sometimes register in the picture. So think about that. Yeah, so, oh, what's Bruno saying? Oh, yeah, okay, yeah. So, yeah, so basically you want to use a cable release. You want to try and avoid as much vibration as possible. And I find if I'm photographing in this room up here, I've got a lovely window. I mean, it's pitch black out there, obviously, but I've got a lovely window up here that has lovely natural daylight. This is my favourite room to photograph in, but the floorboards are a bit wonky. And if I walk on the floorboards and it moves my light box or whatever I've got on the floor, even a tiny amount, the picture's done for. So close up, you can't get away with that. You can't get away with vibrational movement like that. You really need to try and keep everything as still as possible. But just remember to breathe. That's always useful. And one good tip, actually, when we're talking about supporting cameras, let me just show you this picture. This was one of Tina's that I was talking about earlier on from the Irish bogs. And one thing that she did, which I thought was absolutely brilliant, is she uses a child's swimming armband, and she puts her camera on top, and then if she wants to adjust the height, she just lets a little bit of the air out. And I just thought that is genius, because if you've got a beanbag and you're out in a really wet area, a bog or anything like that, it can be a nightmare, because obviously the water will, you know, if you don't have waterproof covering, it will soak into the beans or whatever is inside. So a child's swimming armband. I want to see everybody out there with the armbands. I'll have to get one. So the next thing was just about depth of field. Now, I said earlier on that people want to find ways that they can maximize the depth of field in close-up photography. As I said, if you want to keep the aperture wide open, brilliant, I'm all for that. But obviously there's the other side where people want maximum depth of field. And for that, really, well, there are quite a few ways that you can do it, but focus stacking is probably one of the best ways of achieving sort of maximum focus. And you know, I'm not an expert by any means on that, but what it involves is that you're taking a photograph, you're focusing it on a certain part of the, say it's an inset, you're photographing maybe the eye of the inset, then you're changing the focus point very slightly, maybe 2 millimeters in, and taking another one, then another 2 millimeters, then another 2 millimeters in, usually on a focusing rail. And then you would combine those images later, and they'll give you a much better perception of depth than you'd get in one shot. Even if it was on like f30 or f22 or something, you're still going to get a much better shot with focus stacking. And there's a lot of people out there that actually do that handheld, and I just think, crikey, they must have the steadiest hands of anyone, because there's no way I would be able to do that handheld. So yeah, but in terms of focusing, I would say use all of the aids on your camera to help you focus. When I'm shooting close up, I only ever use manual focus. But there are so many aids on modern cameras now. You've got focus peaking, you've obviously got manual focus, you've got the zebra lines and things like that. So you've got, and also obviously magnifying it as well. You can magnify the area that you're focusing on. That's really important. So have a look in your camera manual and try out every single way of gaining accurate focus, and find the way that works best for you. Because I find some ways like focus peaking that I don't get on with that. So you might find that a split screen works better for you. So just play with it until you find a way that really works for you. Yeah, so focusing, and and just be really deliberate, because in close up, if you miss the focus by even slightly, and say you're photographing a bug and your focus is just behind its eye, it's done for, because the eyes are so important, the focusing is so important in close up, that if you miss it by even a millimeter, then you will never get that back, and it's so annoying. So like I say, use all of the aids that you've got to make sure that you can get it right. And focus stacking, you can do it in Photoshop, but a lot of people use Zareen Stacker or Helicon Focus. There are various software programs that you can get that will help you with that. I don't personally, but I am amazed at some of the pictures, like the slime molds that you can get with it. So that's worth a go. And don't worry, we are nearing the end. Oh yeah, focusing aids, we talked about lighting. Yes, lighting, very important. yes, Affinity is excellent. And I really should say that about Affinity too as well, because Affinity is obviously our sponsor. So, but Affinity is excellent for that. And lighting, I would just say, now you can use, obviously there's a lot of macro flash equipment out there. There's lots of dedicated macro flash equipment. I like to use natural lighting. I like to use, if I am going to use any artificial lighting, I like the little Manfrotto Lumimuse. I don't know if anyone's seen those, but the little ones that got little LEDs in them, and you could use them just to shine a little bit of light onto the underside of a flower or on a butterfly wing or something like that. They're only about so big, and you can put filters on the front and things like that. So they're really good. Now, I guess, yeah, like I say, I mean, I think there's another version that you can get as well that's very similar to the Lumimuse. Now, Flash, obviously a lot of macro people use Flash. I'm not an expert in Flash by any means. So, please feel free to email me questions afterwards and I can find out for you. But Flash questions, not really my thing. But yes, you can get, obviously Nikon and Canon do amazing sort of ring flashes and things for macro. What you don't want to do is use the flash on your camera. If you use the pop-up flash on your camera, it's going to cast a shadow. If you're photographing an insect or something, it's not going to be great. So if a flash pops up when you're trying to photograph an insect in low light or something, pop it down. It's not going to help you. It's going to make things worse. So you want to get you want to use them either dedicated macro flash, or have a play around with the continuous lighting like the Lumimuse. So that's lighting. And oh no, we're nearly there. I think we've got one more picture that I had to show you. Shadow, we won't talk about that, so that's all right. Panel. Flash. Oh yeah, and I guess let me just show you this last picture I've got, because I do think it's rather lovely. There we go. Now that's one of my favourites again from the first competition, and that one was by Rachel Chappell, and she says, I like to photograph flowers when they are a little past their best. Not only do you get more value from a vase of flowers, but the slightly drying out of the petals enhances the textures and creates some interesting shapes. Where this iris has started to fade, it created a series of sweeping lines arcing around the petal. I used a shallow depth of field to draw attention to the lines while softly echoing the lines further back. These flowers are a natural demonstration of contrast in the colour wheel, with the blue and yellow parts making each colour appear more vibrant. It wasn't until I was editing on the computer that the lines reminded me of a crashing wave, with the band of yellow acting as a distant swathe of sand on a sunlit beach. And I love that, because I think it sums up a lot of things that we've been talking about this evening. And that's the idea of using the traditional rules of composition, using the colour, really directing the eye with the focus, all of those sorts of things. I think it's an absolutely beautiful picture. And like I say, it was one of my favourites from the first year. And all I wanted to say to end on was just enjoy it, because macro can be tricky. It can, but it is so much fun. And once you get into it, you really won't want to stop. You'll be picking up all sorts of things from around the house, wanting to see what it looks like with a macro lens or one of the alternatives. So just enjoy it. And a time like this, I personally find macro photography so therapeutic when we're all going through such a big thing at the moment. Sometimes really focusing on those small details can be such a wonderful way of just freeing your mind up a bit and bringing you a bit of peace. So I really hope that you'll all give it a go. And if anyone has any questions, you can contact me through the Close Up Photography of the Year website, and I will do my best to answer them. But I know we're going to go into a Q&A, so hopefully some of your questions will be answered in there. So thank you for listening to me rabbiting on. I hope it was useful.
No, it was great, really good. Lots and lots of questions as well.
Cool.
So that's always nice to see. One of the main questions that I've seen coming up a lot is people are asking about where they can find the names of the photographers that you've mentioned, but they're all on the Close Up Photography of the Year
Yeah, if you go onto the coupotty.com website, there's a list of galleries at the top, and everybody that I've talked about was either shortlisted or was in the top 100 or won. So they're all on there. And in fact, if you do go on there, you'll probably see loads of other stuff that you like. So have a good browse. But they're all the names, and also last year's one, all of the technical details will be on there. This year, we're still putting them up. So you might have to wait a bit to get the camera details. But most of them, you'll be able to find full technical details. If not, drop me a line and I can email you what they used. It's fine. So anything missing, let me know.
Right. Okay, so some questions. If you're starting using a macro lens, they're talking about a screw-on lens, should you also put the camera in macro mode?
Oh, good question. I would say no. That's my gut feeling, because I would say a lot of the cameras, manufacturers call a macro mode, but we all know it's not really. It will allow you to get all it does is it blows the background out. So it's going to make you, it's not going to physically change much. It's just going to give you a perception that it's changed something. So I would say don't put it in macro mode, just use the screw on. That's what I would say. But people might have a different opinion on that, but I wouldn't put it in macro mode, no.
Okay, thank you. Now, I don't fully understand this question. It says, when you say close up, is it an ordinary macro lens like a Canon 100mm?
Ah, good question.
So, yeah.
I do. Basically, again, manufacturers like to sell lenses, obviously, and in order to sell lenses, they often, again, call them macro lenses, but sometimes they're not true macro lenses. They're just lenses that will allow you to get closer, and the minimum focusing distance would not be considered enough to give you one-to-one magnification. So I would say you can get really good close-up pictures with that sort of lens, but really make sure you read the specifications to make sure it is a true life-size one-to-one if that's what you're looking for.
Okay. As a rule, if it's a zoom lens and it says macro, it just means it goes a bit closer.
Yeah.
If it's a prime lens, so a fixed focal length, and it says macro, it probably is. But just
absolutely.
Check the specifications and make sure you've got your one-to-one magnification.
The only thing I really care about when I'm looking for macro is just literally looking at the minimum focusing distance, because you know, if you sometimes that gets dropped right down in the specifications and it'll be really low down in the table. But for macro photography, obviously, it's essential to find out how physically close can I get with the focus still working, basically.
Yeah, and actually that's a really important point, because the focusing distance that you're talking about there is from the sensor. So say it says 10 centimeters,
right.
Actually it's not from the end of the lens, it's from the sensor, so you can actually get a bit closer than you think.
Right. Absolutely, because people get confused with that, don't they? And I think it's easy to get confused because you think front of the lens, subject, but like you say, it's the focal plane, which is the sensor, that's the distance. So like you say, you can get closer than you think, definitely.
Yeah. Sue was asked if you could tell us the settings for the spider photo, which I have to say is the cutest little spider.
It's amazing, isn't it? I can actually. I think I have got that here. Hang on. Is this the the zebra spider?
Yes.
Zebra spider. Yeah, I have got that. Hang on. That was Joe's, wasn't it? Yeah, she used a Canon 7D Mark II with a Sigma 105 f2.8, and her ISO was a whopping 2,500. The shutter speed was 1/1000th of a second at f7.1, and she handheld that. So hats off to her.
I guess she was using a fast shutter speed, so she stood a bit more chance. But
yeah, and she was sitting down as well, so that helps.
Oh yeah. Okay. Linda says she's very new to macro photography, and the few photos that she's taken are only focused in the center. How do you get full screen focus?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Well, really, I guess the sweet spot in the lens is always going to be in the center, isn't it? So I mean, if you're, I guess what we talked about earlier with things about focus stacking and things like that, if you're really after, if you photograph a flower and you're shooting, say, I don't know, say you're using like f18, normally in any other genre, f18 would be amazing and you get incredible front to back focus, but close up, because you're so close to the subject, the depth of field is literally millimeters. Yep. So really, if you want to get beyond that, even if you're using a really small aperture, you know, like say f22 or whatever, or beyond, you're still not going to get a great depth of field because you're so close to the subject. So I would say if you really want the greatest depth of field, you need to use focus stacking, or you know, I guess that's probably the best way of doing it, because you might think, oh, okay, small aperture, great depth of field. Doesn't quite work like that in macro.
Yeah, the fact it's around the outside, it's sort of hiding the fact that actually it's a little bit further away or a little bit closer. You just can't see it's, centimeters or millimeters make a big difference, don't they, when you get very close?
Absolutely. And also if you're, I mean, if she's getting softness around the edges, if it, some people go to the extremes of their lenses, don't they? And they use the ultimate wide aperture or the ultimate, narrow aperture. But in fact, the lens doesn't perform at its best like that. So you might want to stop it down a bit and it will give you a little bit better. Because if you've got softness around the edges, that could be a reason that, if it depends how out of focus that what she's getting really.
Yes, that's a good point. Actually, yeah. So if you're shooting wide open, the edges are likely to be a bit soft.
Yeah.
Right, we've got a question that someone emailed in. This person has got a 40 millimeter macro lens and a 70 to 300 millimeter zoom lens for her Nikon crop sensor camera. She loves taking close-up pictures and macro shots and would like to get closer magnification or greater magnification. She can't decide whether to go for a macro lens, another macro lens, a magnification lens that she can screw onto the end of her existing lenses, or extension tubes. What would you recommend there?
I would always go macro lens, always. I mean, the thing is, with obviously when you're using extension tubes, you can get a loss of light. When you're using the screw-on filters, if you use too many, or sometimes if you can see the edge of the filter in the picture and you'll get vignetting, the black corners when you're using a screw-on one. I mean, the Nissi one isn't so bad because it's very thin. But if you get a thicker one or you screw more than one on together, you might start seeing the edge, actually seeing it in the picture. Right. So I mean, if you can afford it, I would always go macro personally.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, extension tubes are good because they do let you get really, really close, but it gets a little bit more complicated, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah. I mean, I think the thing you get a loss of light, don't you, with extension tubes? I think you do. Yeah. So I think that can be an issue. And also some of the other things that I vaguely touched on earlier, some of them, for instance, if you're reversing the lens or something like that, you can get a loss of contact. So you might lose autofocus, you might lose the metering and that sort of thing. So you need to bear that in mind when you're looking at those slightly cheaper, very cheaper options.
Now, Lisa's asked about wind apps. I think she's talking about apps that predict the wind.
Oh, now that's a really good, I can't think now, but someone recommended me one. Basically, the BBC one is not very accurate. I'm sure that some people will disagree with me, but it's not. Now, somebody that, in fact, I should imagine some of the people in the group might have a suggestion for this, but I cannot remember. Again, someone suggested a really good one where you could literally see the cloud cover coming in minute by minute, and it was amazing because it was a
Someone's
really
just
good one.
Clear skies.
Clear skies. It. That's it. Oh, good. I knew someone would have the answer.
When you know it, you know it. Judy's got a good question. Can using flash outdoors help with movement when the wind is more than 5 miles per hour?
Yes. It's the short answer to that. Yes, it will help. And to be honest, it's 5 miles per hour. Obviously, it's just a general rule. I mean, I've taken pictures out in sort of 50-mile-an-hour winds and it's been fine. So don't be too stuck on it and think, okay, 5 miles an hour, I'm staying in. So, but yeah, it's still possible, definitely. But like I said, if you do things like you choose a plant, say it's plants, if you choose a plant with a thick stem, or you take out, like I say, a bit of cane, or the Wimberley plant, for instance, if you take all of those things, or even if you just get someone, say it's quite windy and you've got your partner or a friend with you, and you can get them to stand to kind of block the wind a little bit, that's always really helpful. But there's always some photograph, even if you go out and the wind's too much for flowers or insects, there's always something to photograph. So always go out no matter what, unless it's obviously hurricane winds, in which case maybe not.
Yeah. I guess the difficulty is focusing and firing the shutter and the flash when the thing that's moving is at the right point, because you can pre-focus, but you need the subject to come back in, and then part of the challenge.
The good thing is about plants and things, it is, and the good thing about plants is that they tend to go back to where they were. So when they flip about a bit, they look like they're going everywhere, but they generally will settle exactly where they were again. So you can if you stay long enough and do that whole thing of sitting and watching, you'll be able to predict what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. And I'd just say definitely you can do that with flash, but just go out and watch for a while, watch where it's going.
Yeah. Okay. Now, Lisa has asked, what would we recommend as the best way to weatherproof a camera? So for, it's windy, wet.
Yeah.
or sandy.
Well, I still really like those Optex sleeves. I don't know about you, Ange, but they're so cheap. They're a bit like, they're just a clear plastic bag, aren't they, with a drawstring front.
Yeah.
You slip that on, tighten at the front, and they don't look the nicest. But I've tested about 15 other weatherproofing things, and I've never found anything that has done the job better than just that. So you get what, 2 in a pack for $5 or something.
Oh, that's very good.
Yeah. So, I mean,
I've used Think Tank do some called emergency rain covers, and they come in, I think they're in 3 different sizes. They're not quite as cheap as £5 for 2, but they are one of the more affordable ones, and they're pretty good. Actually, if you're struggling, you can use a plastic bag and you just put it over the back of your camera and put an elastic band around the lens.
Yeah.
You can still get some control on the buttons and dials through the thing.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, there's so many things out there, but I think someone's just said sandwich bags, and they're also brilliant as well. Anything like that. Yeah.
Lorraine says, do you use manual or autofocus? She struggles to get sharp images now. I think you said you use manual focus, don't you?
I always use manual focus. Some people will use auto to get an idea and then switch to manual focus, which is fine. But I always use manual focus. I always magnify the view, and like I said before, I do prefer the split screen option. I use the Fuji, and I like the way that I can line it up because it just reminds me of the old days. My old film camera where you could do that.
Yes. Oh, it is nice. And there's also, as you mentioned,
focus peaking
colours come towards you.
Yeah, you can choose a colour as well, can't you? So that's quite exciting. But the focus peaking stuff, I tried it and I just didn't get on with it. I don't get on with it very well, but I think loads of people love it, so I can understand why. But for some reason, it just didn't work with the way I work. So
it really depends what you're photographing, because actually it works on contrast rather than sharpness, and the two are usually the same, but not always. And there's all sorts of things.
That's a really good point, actually, because I think people forget that that all it is contrast. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Okay, Alexandra says, who were the bokeh photographers?
I would say Perdita Petzel. Have a look at her. Her surname is Petzl. And her partner Henry. They've got a website called, I think it's called Fairy Tale Nature. And they've got some beautiful stuff. I mean, if there's the fact I think they've got a video on there showing how they do a lot of their work, and their work is amazing. They're from Austria, and they shoot everything in situ because their backdrops, people think they're so beautiful and fairy tale like that they must have done it later on, or multiple exposure, but they're all completely in situ. They're amazing. So yeah, have a look. Oh, there we go. Yeah, Henrik Sprantz.
Great. Thank you. Ambi emailed and she said she has problems with getting her images sharp. She says when she tries to photograph a tiny item such as an insect she tends to photograph in, the sides are slightly blurry, and she's wondering how she can address that. Does she need to move a bit further from the object, or does she need to use extension tubes?
Well, it depends. I guess the first thing I would do is check what her minimum focusing distance is on her lens, because that will obviously dictate whether or not she can get any physically close than that. Then I would probably stop the lens down so it wasn't at its, wasn't at its smallest aperture. I'd probably, open it up a bit. And then, I mean, it is tricky because it depends what lens she's using as well. Some lenses are better and they give you more corner-to-corner sharpness than others, don't they? So does she say what lens that she's using?
Yeah, she's got a Canon EFS 35mm 2.8 macro IS STM.
Okay. Oh, that sounds pretty decent, isn't it? So I don't know what the minimum focusing distance is for that though.
No, not off the top of my head, but having looked at Ambi's photograph, I think it is a depth of field issue.
Right, okay.
So either not getting enough depth of field at a small aperture, or basically not using a small enough aperture.
Okay, yeah.
It could be resolved by focus stacking.
Yeah, I mean, so, although it does take more time, I don't do it myself, but the next thing I really want to get into is focus stacking, because I always thought it was reserved for pictures where you want to get an insect shot from front to back or whatever, but I've seen so many plant photographers using it now, and it's almost like it still looks natural, because I've seen people when they combine like 70, 80 photographs, and it just doesn't look like your eye would see it, because that's not how our eyesight works. But if you keep it natural and you combine, I don't know, maybe 20 pictures or whatever, it can look completely natural and it looks beautiful. So I think that's the next area that I'd like to get into, and I think you're right, that might be something that she needs to look into, definitely. That could help.
We've got a few questions with people asking about the lights that you mentioned. Could you just tell us
Okay.
again what the lights are,
Oh, the
please?
little ones. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
the Manfrotto Lumimuse is the first one, and there was another one. What did I say? Oh, I do. What else I use? You can use your phone for lighting, and you can use a tablet, or you can use an LED panel. All of those things. You know, if you're looking at continuous lighting, but the Lumimuse is really good just for shining a little bit of light in. They're not that expensive, and they come with little filters that you can put over the front. And some of them, I've got the really early version that only has like 3 LEDs, but I think you can get ones with sort of 9 LEDs now, so they're dimmable, and they're really good for just adding a tiny bit of daylight, balanced light into a picture.
Okay. Someone has asked what a vintage lens is.
It's just an old lens. Now, I would recommend there was a I must remember, there was a guy who look on YouTube and put in macro vintage lenses, because there's loads of people doing some really wacky, really cool stuff, and there's a couple on my caption sheet here where I can tell you the exact ones they used. Actually, hang on, maybe I can find it. But these are lenses that you can pick up. Often they're German or Russian. You can pick them up on eBay for sort of 20 quid, and you can do some amazing stuff with them. But let me just see if I can find an example of someone. In fact, I might have written down the flower one. Oh no, it just says vintage lens. That's not helpful. Oh, I have got an example. Well, tell me the next question while I look for this example.
Okay. Well, someone's asked, how can you focus stack an insect? Won't they move?
Oh, yes. Another good question. Now, there's another really good video that I would say have a look. And it's a guy called Oliver Wright, and that's Wright with a W. And he's on YouTube, and he's got a video of himself filmed while he's focus stacking an insect and hand holding at the same time. And it's really interesting because he's holding the camera in his hand, and obviously you can use the focusing rails and stuff, but he's just very gently moving his hand forward like that. And really, yes, insects will fly away, but that's when the planning and the research comes into it. And that's when you can photograph one feeding, mating, early in the morning. You've got to try and maximize your chances of keeping that insect still. So yes, it is hit and miss. You might end up only getting 6 focus stacked pictures, when really you need 10, 20 or whatever of an insect. So yeah, you need to really research that animal and try and work out when is it going to be still for the maximum amount of time. Don't cast your shadow on it, because it will fly away, etc. So yes, that is an issue, but that's when people often handhold focus stacking, because it gives them that flexibility rather than using a focusing rail. So watch Oliver Wright and you'll see it's possible.
Okay, so someone has a Canon RP and her macro lens is a Tamron 80mm. When she tries to shoot close up, she always gets a weird noise from her lens, and whenever she tries to get close to her subject, so it stops when she moves away.
Is it hunting? It might be hunting for focus, or it might just be the mechanism inside the lens. Sometimes it clonks about a bit, doesn't it? When I can't remember the bits inside the lenses.
Focus mechanism.
That would be the one. I would say, I would say there's nothing wrong with the lens. They do that sometimes, so don't worry that you've got something wrong with it. And yeah, sometimes it will do it when it's trying to hunt for focus. So if you're using it on autofocus and it's trying to go in and out, it'll make a horrible noise while it's trying to do it. So yes, I would say use manual and don't worry about the clonking. It's fine.
And it's possible if it's not getting sharp, then maybe you're just a little bit too close and you need to come back.
Again, check that minimum focusing distance. And don't forget, if you've got a macro lens, you can still screw a close-up filter to the front of a macro lens. It's just because you've got a macro doesn't mean you can't add bits or do bits to it. You can still do that. But I mean, that lens, the Tamron, is a really nice lens. That lens, so it will do the job amicably, but I think just check the minimum focusing distance. It probably is struggling to focus, and then it's clonking about, and in fact you might check about whether you've got the image stabilization on or not. It might be just struggling a little bit, so yeah, that probably it's not broken.
Zoe's got a similar sort of question, basically saying she struggles to shoot macro in focus. Doesn't matter whether she uses auto or manual, they're never sharp. She's tried lots of different apertures and shutter speeds too, but still struggling. Zoe, I wonder are you using a tripod, because that could well be the problem.
a tripod is essential, really.
Yeah, and with macro, I mean, with everything else, you're kind of often worried about that kind of movement and that, but with macro, a little bit of backwards and forwards makes a huge difference as well.
Absolutely. It makes a huge difference, and in fact it's worth experimenting with that. If you go to photograph a flower and you handhold or whatever, it's really worth just going in and out a little bit, and you'll see how the entire composition changes dramatically, like you say, Ange, because that plane of focus is so narrow. It's so narrow that I would say, like you say, get it on a tripod first thing. Don't, you know, even like I said, even if you're using f/22, it still won't be sharp from the front of one flower to the back of the flower, because you're so close to the subject, and depth of field is affected by how close you are to the subject. So don't worry about it, but just get it on a tripod, check that minimum focusing distance, because it will get to a point where the lens literally just won't physically be able to focus, and there's nothing you can do about that apart from add an attachment or, you know, jig around it. Yeah. So yeah,
that reminds me, one of my favorite
tripod first.
One of my favorite accessories is a micro positioning plate, which I'm trying to think how you do it now. You have your tripod on your head, then you put the micro positioning plate on, and you put your camera on that.
Oh, it's very exciting.
And then basically I put my lens,
I love that, yeah,
focusing, and then you literally just wind it back, because it's easier to move by very small amounts when you're winding a screw than it is moving a whole tripod back by 5 millimeters.
Absolutely, yeah. No, they are brilliant. A positioning plate is fantastic, and if you're a bit of a control freak like me, it's very satisfying as well. And like you're saying, you can just crank it a bit and you'll go millimeter at a time, or less than a millimeter. It's and it really I think what it does is you think, oh, I don't need all this stuff, what's it going to do, you know, it's going to slow me down, but sometimes slowing you down is exactly what you need to do with macro. Just slow it down. So yes, you're right, good mention of I love that as well.
Anna's got an interesting question about the competition. She says, when she's submitting an image, how important is the accompanying narrative?
Oh, good question. Now, I don't get to see anybody's names. I'm one of the judges, so I don't see anybody's names when they send a photograph in. But sometimes if I'm looking at a picture and I think, oh, you know, I can't work out what's going on, or I'm a bit worried that something doesn't look quite right or something like that, then I will ask my husband, who does have everything on his computer, can you share the caption with me? And he'll share the caption. So we will read it occasionally. So I would say give as much information as you can in any competition. If they ask you to supply a caption, supply it, because sometimes it can, you know, it can mean the difference between a judge thinking, oh yeah, that's fine, or me thinking, or a judge thinking, oh, that doesn't look quite right. I'm not sure about that, because if they often you will contact the photographer and say, can you clarify this, or is it definitely that wasn't a composite or whatever. But I would say yes, I do like a bit of caption info if possible.
Elaine asks, which affinity app do you suggest for focus stacking? They are offering 90-day free trial at the moment and 50% off their apps. So I think Affinity Photo would be the one to go for.
I would definitely say that. No, I would definitely. I mean, Affinity is great, and I'm not just saying that because they are a sponsor. It is really good, because I think to begin with, until probably about a couple of years ago, I hadn't really used it, and now you know, Dan in particular, that's all he'll use, my husband. So yeah, I would definitely say that, yeah, go for it. I mean, it's a really good deal as well, so nothing to lose is there.
Oh, we've got another question about the competition. Someone asking there whether any of the winners or shortlisted people took their photos on a phone.
Yes, they did. In fact, there were quite a few phone pictures. And again, when myself and the other judges are judging, we don't look at what equipment was used at all. So we pick based on the image we're seeing, and then later on I'll learn what technique, and I always go, wow, my God, that was taken on an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever. So there were quite a few actually, and like I said before, Melanie Colley, she shoots a lot of her stuff on iPhones, and there were, I think, a couple of Jane Simmons this year and last year that were shortlisted. They were on phones as well. So yeah, we do. I mean, the thing of the competition is that we really don't care what it's shot on. It's all about the picture at the end of the day. I don't care if it's shot on a 10-pound camera or a Hasselblad, you know, it doesn't make any difference.
There's another question about lighting. Someone's saying, do you think you should use specialist lighting or general flash or continuous lighting? Because obviously you mentioned ring lights and macro lights and stuff like that. I mean, they are really good, but they're a bit more expensive.
I think if you're really getting into it, then I really think the specialist, like I wouldn't go for your standard flash. I think if you ever look at sort of what Canon, what Nikon do with their speed lights and that sort of thing, and the kind of, you can get I think Canon and Nikon do those ones that you have the kind of arms on the side, don't you? You've got the little flashes on the end. Anything that gets the flash off the camera is going to be good for macro. You want it off the camera because you don't want to create, you know, shadows everywhere. So I would say if you're really getting into it, then yes, flash is a really good option. But if you're just kind of, if you're not sure and you're just playing around a bit, or some people just always use natural light, but I like the continuous lighting because then I can see exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
For me, flash is still a bit of a dark art. But if I use continuous lighting, I can see exactly what I'm getting.
Well, we have a webinar coming up in March that you might want to watch then.
Oh yeah, I will then. What's that? Is it a lighting technique I could do with that?
It's about using flash if you're inexperienced with flash.
Oh good, okay. I'll look out for it.
Okay. Oh, someone saying, would multiple bursts help in the wind? It might do.
Yes, might well do. Exactly. Answer. Just experiment. Yeah, absolutely. That could well help.
Someone said, oh, with the Manfrotto Lumimuse light, would you use it handheld or on a separate tripod?
It really doesn't matter. If you've got something like a Gorilla Pod, or if you've got the Wimbley clamp or something like that, you could have it. I mean, I tend to set the tripod up, set the self timer, and I'll hold it. But that's because I don't, you know, often I don't have another option. So it really does depend what works best for you either. It's fine. And you can get little tripods, little tabletop tripods for them as well. So
great. Okay. How many entries does the competition get?
6,500 and something from sort of 50 countries.
Great. Okay, that's really good. Someone's asked, what tripod do you use again, and what head would you recommend for macro? So it was one of the Manfrotto 055 series, wasn't it?
The 055, yeah. I use the one, the Manfrotto 055, because I really like that, you know, the horizontal column. I like to be able to reverse the column. And I do think I've got a ball head on mine, and I think what you're saying about the plates and things, if you really get into it, I definitely consider getting a micro, some focusing plates or rails, definitely. But I have a ball head on my Manfrotto. My Manfrotto is so old and it's all gummed up water and everything else, but it still does the job.
That's what you want. Now, Liz has asked, how far away can you be before it ceases to be close up? Is it about the specific subject you're shooting or the lens and camera?
That's a very good question, and that's something that we've had to think about again and again and again with the competition. But like I said before, life size is macro. Anything, you know, smaller, anything beyond that. Well, in fact, I mean, we've got the micro category as well. So we do, I would say, a bit of both is the answer to that. I think sometimes it can, strictly speaking, it should be your proximity to the subject, but I'm not that strict on it, and I like the idea that it can be the lens. You could use a telephoto lens and you could be zooming into something. That doesn't worry me at all if someone sends in a picture. We had lots, you know, pictures taken with wide angle lenses, telezooms, etc. So I'm not too strict on that, to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, wide angles are quite nice because you get the sort of context of the thing
exactly.
You're really close to as well. Cecilia says she thinks she might have missed it, but do you have a preferred camera system?
I know you didn't. I didn't say I've got the Fuji X-T2, but to be honest, I still absolutely adore my Sigma 105 macro lens. So I still use that on my old Canon 40D, and it still does the job. So I use a bit of both. I use my macro lens on the 90mm on is it 90mm? I think it is, on my Fuji, and then I use the 105 Sigma lens on my Canon, my old Canon.
Emma says she, to keep costs down, she uses an M42 screw-fit bellows on an old Zeiss lens attached to the camera with an adapter. She's going to get herself some armbands.
Oh,
fantastic.
Brilliant. And I have to say, that sounds like a stonking setup. I mean, that's brilliant. I didn't mention bellows really, and I should have said, I'm glad she brought it up. But yeah, that sounds like a great setup. So yeah, get those armbands.
Oh, it's an interesting question from Diane. What are the most important things to look at when looking at a macro lens? And she's also said yoga mats are a good tool for keeping yourself dry and can also raise butterflies. Okay. Don't quite
raise
follow that bit, but don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean,
So the macro lens, what things do you look at?
Yeah. I would say, again, all I'm massively into is the minimum focusing distance. So you want to look at the minimum focusing distance. Obviously, you've got all of the main people like Canon, Nikon, but I would say, you know, third-party lenses, brilliant. I'd say Sigma, Tamron, a lot cheaper. You know, I say minimum focusing distance. Also, I would say focal range, because obviously focal length, you want to, if you're photographing butterflies or something like that, you're going to want to keep a little bit further away and zoom in. So it really depends what you're photographing, really. But I would say, after optical performance and things like that, I'm really interested in the minimum focusing distance, and that's my main concern. And what would you say with anything you particularly look for, do you think?
No, I think that makes sense, because sometimes think about the focal length, but actually ultimately it is the working distance that you've got, and when you get really, really close, it's much harder to get light in and stuff. So yeah, a comfortable distance. And you know, you've got a Sigma 105, that is a really popular focal length. And actually, you're using it on a crop sensor, so that's actually working out more like 160.
Yes, which is perfect for what I want. And I'd also say, if you're getting a macro lens, sometimes macro lenses make great portrait lenses as well. So if you're thinking, okay, I can't afford to just buy this one lens, just bear in mind that you can use it for other things too.
Okay. Someone is saying that she's been told that you can't use a tripod in some gardens.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because they can be a risk to others. And she's even been told off when there's no one around.
In that case, beanbag, fine. Sometimes you can get those, a monopod is an option. Some people, because what they're worried about is you having the legs out and people tripping over them. But to be honest, the minute you put your camera bag down, someone could trip over it. So I think someone like the National Trust, they think that you're using it for professional purposes. That's why they can, as soon as a tripod comes out, they think all professional and they can get a little bit upset about it. But there are gardens like the RHS Wisley where you can go and they do, not at the moment, but they do photography mornings where you just go in and you can get your tripod out as wide as you like and it's fine. So look out for gardens that offer that, like an early morning photo kind of hour or something. But yes, that combination, I would say monopod, beanbag, or just tuck your elbows in.
Lynn has said, she's mentioning lenses, Helios, Takanawa 50 or 58mm, f1.2 and f2. She says, don't buy from the EU or Russia, they're heavily taxed.
Oh, good point. Very good point. And yes, the Helios was the one I was trying to think of that I had written down. So thank you. I can stop my search.
Right, so we're nearly there with the questions. Someone has a 100mm Canon macro lens, and when getting really close up, it struggles with lack of light. Is it her lens or a general issue?
General issue, really, general issue. I mean, macro lighting is always going to be an issue with macro because you're so close. I would say you're looking at either using a flash or using one of the continuous lighting, and also obviously the autofocus system needs light to be able to focus properly. So I say if you're not using manual and you're autofocusing, it's going to struggle in a low light situation. So it's a general macro issue. It's not the lens. So, you're going to have to add some more light, whether bouncing it in with a reflector or whatever you decide to do, you need to add some more light in. It's not the lens.
It's what we were saying before. Just wonder if you're, as you get closer to your subject, obviously, you're blocking a lot of light. And sometimes you can even find, if your camera's on a tripod, if you sort of step back and press it like that, you might just get enough light in.
Good point.
On your scene. But
absolutely, get the self timer on and step back. That could be a good first step, actually. Yeah, and if you're on the ground and you've got your beanbag or whatever, like you say, you physically are going to be blocking a lot of the light. So try and bounce it around with a bit of tin foil. I screw up a bit of tin foil and then open it out on a bit of card and just reflect a bit of light back in that way. So
that's a good idea. Yeah. Okay, well, we've reached the end. That's all of the questions. Thank you very much for answering all those. I mean, I think everyone's really enjoyed that. There's lots of people coming in saying thank you, and Lumi Muse is sold out, by the way.
Oh no.
Great. All right, well, Tracy, it's great to see you, and thank you so much for spending the time I forgot to count them all, but we should have had a ping ping ping. But
I know I didn't count them all, so if anyone bothered, then they can tell me whether it was 50 or not, but we'll pretend it was if it wasn't. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and I hope everyone feels inspired to enter Close-Up Photographer of the Year.
Oh, I hope so. Thanks, Ange, and thanks everyone for watching. Appreciate it.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.